And I remember again sitting in my ship's container office looking through the window and suddenly almost passing out with shock.
When we left Narendra Sethia, Ron Hardy and Mike Ashdown of the Serious Crime Squad were striding purposefully along the beach to his shipping container in St. Lucia. The fate of the former supply officer of HMS Conqueror is about to collide with that of Clive Ponting, the Ministry of Defence civil servant turned whistleblower, who is now facing trial for a breach of the Official Secrets Act. The Belgrano affair is about to reach its climax.
This trial is not about spying.
Shadow Defence Secretary Denzil Davis.
It is a matter of lying, a matter of misleading Parliament. It is about a conspiracy to withhold information, and it's about the breach by ministers of the sacred trust of accountability which we believe they owe to this House.
To the government and its defenders, Ponting and Sethia are traitors. Lord Robin Butler was private secretary to Margaret Thatcher.
I don't think the Prime Minister would have welcomed having to take proceedings against Ponting or Sethia, but it's rather like a parent disciplining a child. You don't want to do it, but discipline had to be exerted.
Discipline had to be exerted. Sethia and Ponting are about as far apart in character as you could imagine. One, a high-minded, high-flying career civil servant. The other, a rebellious former naval officer now living on a Caribbean island. What they have in common is that they both produced truthful accounts of the events of May the 2nd, 1982.
There is a dreadful irony that two individuals who decided to follow their conscience and tell the truth suffered more than anybody else.
Stuart Preble was the journalist who revealed Sethia's identity after a tip-off from Tam Diel.
The Old Bailey, a disloyal civil servant being taught a lesson, and on the other side of the world, a disloyal Navy officer also to be taught a lesson.
Robert Rogers, who ran the Table Office, remembers the vicious atmosphere well.
I think there was a very strong feeling in the highest political circles that we've got somebody banged to rights, we're bloody well going to have him swinging in the wind.
As 1985 begins and the defensive force of the state bears down on the two men, Sethia once again takes to his diary.
4th of January 1985. I've had the urge to start writing again, against my better judgment, but these past few months have been so fraught that it would be difficult not to maintain some sort of record of events. More than 20 months since the last entry, which ironically was written when Simon and Daphne O'Keefe were out sailing with me. Since then, much water has passed under many bridges, discovering that Simon had leaked my diary to a Labour Member of Parliament, returning here, Stuart Preble arriving at my doorstep in November, and me thinking he was a Ministry of Defence plot come to arrest me, Richard Morley and his crazy involvement, the Observer articles, more newspaper articles, police in St. Lucia. Sometimes I don't believe it's real, but a make-believe game that's taking place on the other side of the world. I don't have to record any more of a summary. It's in my head, my body, my bones. I never did serve on Conqueror in the Falklands. It's just a bad dream.
I'm Andrew O'Hagan, and from the London Review of Books, this is the Belgrano Diary. Episode 6, The Trials. It's January 1985, 6 months since Clive Ponting leaked documents to Tam Diel, confirming the diary's account of May the 2nd and establishing definitively that the government's version of the sinking was inaccurate and highly misleading. Ponting now stands accused of breaching Section 2 of the Official Secrets Act and faces up to 2 years in prison. Journalist David Lee, who broke the story of Ponting's arrest.
We'd all, for the whole of my journalistic life, campaigned against the use and abuse of the Official Secrets Act to suppress the truth about what went on in government, and had campaigned for a Freedom of Information Act in its place. So the trial of Clive Ponting fell squarely into the issues we'd all been campaigning about for years.
The Official Secrets Act was introduced in 1911. It was only supposed to be emergency legislation, designed to protect Britain from German spies as war threatened Europe. In times of peace, it was open to misuse. An early critic described it as vicious and deployed by the government to protect itself, quote, against the consequences of its own chicanery and at the same time to deceive the public and intimidate the press.
Well, Section 2 of the Official Secrets Act was the notorious one under which any government information, basically, it was a criminal offence to leak it, whether it was important or not. And the classic case was always, under this it was a breach of the Official Secrets Act to reveal the menu in the MOD canteen.
If all government information is official information, then any and all leaks are subject to prosecution. The decision to apply Section 2 is entirely at the discretion of the Attorney General, which is problematic.
You can only prosecute somebody with the consent of the Attorney General, who is a politician and who attends Cabinet. So there was always a political discussion about whether you wanted to do somebody under the Official Secrets Act.
Do you think it was a political trial?
Well, it clearly was a political trial, because why Heseltine, as the minister, wanted him prosecuted was because he had caused the government grave embarrassment. He certainly hadn't threatened national security because the war was over. Clive wanted to tell the truth and the politicians didn't want to tell the truth.
This Prime Minister, myself, my right honourable friend, the Minister for the Armed Forces, have fully discharged their duties and have misled no one. This House will judge whether Mr. Ponting can say the same.
Secretary of State Michael Heseltine and the government have staked their credibility on a guilty verdict. According to Ponting, in the weeks leading up to the trial, they start to interfere.
In the run-up, my phone was tapped, mail was open.
Clive Ponting, speaking in 2019.
We were meeting at my junior barrister's flat to hold meetings and stuff. And one evening, he said, my front door opened too easily tonight. I'm going to get the place swept. And of course, we found the microphone that they put behind one of the pictures in the main room. Now, if it just went to MI5, we weren't particularly bothered about that, but we knew very well that they'd be passing it on to the prosecutor as to what our tactics were.
Then it's decided that any parts of the trial that concern the crown jewels, the top secret report of the sinking prepared by Ponting, will be held in camera. That means in secret. The court cleared, swept for bugs, and the windows boarded up. The jury will now have to be vetted too.
It became a sort of secrecy trial. Then we found out who they'd chosen as the judge. He was an ex-Tory MP candidate.
A couple of months before the trial, Thatcher's press secretary Bernard Ingham said privately that he hoped an appropriately severe member of the judiciary would be appointed. He gets his wish. Justice Anthony McCowan. Before taking up the law, McCowan had been a member of a leading Tory think tank and on the Conservative Party's list of approved candidates. On January the 28th, Clive Ponting shuffles nervously into court number 2 of the Old Bailey. Journalists and politicians squeeze into the court. The jury is sworn in and Ponting enters his plea. Not guilty. David Lee again.
The problem for Clive was that he didn't have a defence on the facts, really, because he'd done it. He'd done what he was accused of doing. And there were no two ways about it. So you had to persuade the jury somehow that they should acquit him, regardless.
Ponting comes up with a risky but bold defence. He will argue that Parliament has a right to know all the information that he leaked.
Now, there's a clause there in the old Section 2 which said you didn't commit an offence if it was your duty in the interest of the state to reveal the information. So that was my defence. It was in the interest of the state that Parliament should be told the truth.
The prosecution, by contrast, will seek to prove that Ponting breached the trust of ministers and acted in bad faith. Their first witness is Heseltine's private secretary, Richard Mottram.
The counsel for the Crown was so boring. He was beyond boring. And I watched the jury when he was introducing the case, and sort of almost his first thing was, well, there was no secrets passed, so the jury were all going, so what are we all doing here then? And then there were the counsel for the defence for Ponting. They were really good. I mean, they were terrifically good. They would sort of lure you into saying things that ultimately you might regret.
Mottram's on the stand for 11 hours over 2 days and gives his account of the production of the Crown Jewels and the government's subsequent decision not to correct the parliamentary record. When it comes time for the defence to cross-examine him, Ponting's counsel asks Mottram if it is, quote, constitutional practice that answers to parliamentary questions are truthful and not deliberately ambiguous or misleading.
You said rather memorably, in a highly charged political situation, one man's ambiguity is another man's truth.
Yes.
Do you stand by that?
Well, I slightly regret saying it because I'm not sure I even got it the right way round. Anyway, I opened The Guardian the next morning and there it was, the leader saying, here we have this man who cannot distinguish between ambiguity and truth, paragraph after paragraph. I'd read The Guardian since I was about 14. So I sort of stand by it. You know what I mean.
Everybody knows what you mean. That's why it's such a memorable quote.
Yes,
it's a rather sort of wonderful Wildean epigram. And like most of Wilde's epigrams, it can be reversed very easily, which is why I was so tickled by you saying it could be.
Yes, afterwards I panicked. I thought, did you get that the right way round? Because, you could say, you sense danger. I'm not a chump. I sense this is a very clever question. You knew you were in trouble. You knew, because he asked you these questions in such a nice, friendly way, if I might just ask, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, what's the next one? I survived.
Indeed.
More witnesses are called. Further arguments are made. The trial runs for 2 weeks, and Tam Dalyell, of course, is in court every day. The managing editor of The Observer, Magnus Linklater, was there too.
I mainly remember sitting next to Tam Dalyell with his sort of stentorian whispers. They've got in there, sort of people turning around. So, Tam was not one to conceal his feelings at all.
And the judge told him he would to stop making faces at the jury.
Tam Dalyell's wife, Kathleen.
Otherwise, he would be sent out of court. Because, every time a witness was saying something that Tam didn't approve, and the judge had eventually had to tell him not to make faces at the jury. The judge was quite right, actually. But I think it's quite funny.
I like how badly behaved he sounds for somebody so well brought up.
Yeah.
Ponting notes in his trial diary that things appear to be going well. But as proceedings draw to a close, the prosecution move to hobble Ponting's defence. They submit to the judge that interests of the state cannot mean some wide and all-embracing public interest. Surely, they argue, the government of the day is the state. Justice McCowan rules in their favour.
He said, well, no, I'm not having any of this rubbish about general civic duty. It's whatever your duty was as a senior civil servant, you've been told they didn't want to reveal it, so it can't have been your duty to do it. He said, right, well, I'm going to rule that the interests of the state are the same as the interests of the government of the day.
As Ponting put it at the time, our whole defence has been swept away. The jury is left with no practical option but to convict. The verdict will be delivered the following Monday, so he has a weekend to sweat it out.
8th of February 1985. Disturbing dreams about policemen. Can't remember the exact details, but the dream instilled a feeling of fear and panic. When I wake up, perhaps it will all go away, but then perhaps it won't.
The day that Justice McCowan sweeps away Ponting's defence is the same day that detectives Ron Hardy and Mike Ashdown approached Sethia's shipping container in St. Lucia.
Hardy looked at me in the face and said, "Do you have the diary?" And when he asked that, the diary was 6 inches away from my right foot, under my desk. And I said to him, "No, sir." He said, "What did you do with it?" I said, "Because of all of the recent publicity, I got so embarrassed and frightened that I went out on a yacht one day and I threw it in the ocean." And so he looked at me and said, "What else have you got here?"
Hardy seems to be after something, anything, that he can take back to the UK with him. In his diary, Sethia had mentioned a number of trivial naval stores that he took from the submarine after the war: a waterproof bag, a handbook on sailmaking, as well as a collection of unclassified navigational charts.
And he then asked about the charts, which seemed to be of great interest. And a very good friend of mine had recently opened a restaurant called the Chart House. And he had taken these charts and then had them varnished into the tabletops. So I drove Hardy and Ashdown down to the restaurant, and they had a camera. And they went round every table in the restaurant photographing the tabletops. And appeared to be very happy with what they had got, which, again, rather surprised me.
Hardy then asks about the logbooks. Sethia denies, once again, any knowledge of their whereabouts. He takes the detectives for a drink, and they leave later that evening. As Sethia goes to bed, he's somewhat perplexed by the visit.
9th of February 1985. The telegraph said the police are still in the Caribbean. Is my phone bugged? Am I being watched so that they can see if I'm moving about with small packages hidden to try and bury the evidence?
What Sethia doesn't know is that after their meeting, Hardy had called the crime correspondent at the Mail on Sunday and told him he'd recovered, quote, certain navigational documents and equipment. The next day, the paper hits the stands.
Exclusive Belgrano breakthrough, Conqueror logs seized. The missing logs of HMS Conqueror, the nuclear sub which sank the General Belgrano, is almost certainly back in the hands of British authorities. The logs and other papers, described as navigational papers, have been recovered and will be returned to London over the next few days.
The verdict in the Ponting case is due the following day.
It was almost like this would divert the public. To put it in simple language, well, we've caught one traitor on one part of the world and got his books back. Now let's deal with the other one.
Well, if the two events were not linked, you'd have to ask yourself why the Attorney General would instruct two senior Scotland Yard detectives to go to St. Lucia in search of a control room log that they absolutely know Sethia could not have stolen.
Journalist Stuart Preble.
It couldn't be any clearer. The mystery of the missing log was being attributed to the Ministry of Defence. And if you could send out a message that it had been stolen from somebody on board the submarine, therefore there was nothing to hide, this could influence the jury in the Ponting trial.
You know, it's the stuff of TV drama, isn't it?
The jury in the trial of Clive Ponting is about to be sent out to consider its verdict. The headlines will be full of such things as another traitor to the government being brought to book. The cumulative effect of both these stories on the public mind was not to be underestimated.
Clive Ponting reads the Mail on Sunday story, and no doubt the jury does too. He heads back into the dock. In his pocket, a toothbrush and a book of the sayings of the Buddha. That's all he's expecting to take into prison. In his summing up, Justice McCowan reminds the jury that there is only one ingredient in dispute, and that is how to interpret, quote, duty in the interest of the state. He hammers home that this can only mean the policies of the ruling government. Section 2 is controversial, he concedes, but reminds the jury that we cannot pick and choose and say this is a law we do not like and therefore we are not going to apply it. He claims Ponting's motives are, quote, pique, spite and wounded pride. The jury are not to be concerned with whether the defendant honestly believed it was his duty to do what he did, nor are they to be swayed by sympathy for his comparative youth, his promise, his lost career. Michael Heseltine couldn't have worded it better.
His summing up was regarded as one of the most biased anybody had ever come across. I mean, he didn't actually direct them to find me guilty, but he did everything he could short of that.
As Ponting and his team wait for the jury to come to a decision, they discuss grounds for an appeal. A guilty verdict is inevitable. At 2 p.m, the bailiff calls them back in. Clive kisses his wife Sally goodbye.
Good evening. The jury in the trial of Mr. Clive Ponting has delivered their verdict. Not guilty. It's a result that has shocked many in Westminster and Whitehall. The decision is a rebuff for Judge Anthony McCowan, an embarrassment for the government, and maybe the final nail in the coffin for Section 2 of the Official Secrets Act.
A victory for Ponting, but also for DL, the jury system and the idea that the public has a right to know. The Campaign for Freedom of Information called the verdict a devastating and historic defeat for the last lonely defenders of Section 2. Outside the Old Bailey, Ponting speaks to the press.
I did what I believe was the right thing last July, and despite all the pressure from the prosecution and the way this case has been handled, 12 ordinary people have supported that decision.
After his acquittal, Clive Ponting is allowed, finally, to resign from the civil service, and he becomes an academic at the University of Swansea. His trial marked the end of the Belgrano affair as a live political issue. In the years that follow, public interest in the sinking starts to wane, and new scandals take its place. In 1986, Michael Heseltine falls out with Thatcher over the future of a company called Westland Helicopters. A letter he wrote criticising the Prime Minister is mysteriously leaked to the press, and Heseltine is forced to resign. As for Thatcher, she wins another majority in the 1987 general election. The Morning News proclaims a record third term for the British Prime Minister.
Most of the late editions here. The Daily Mail, Maggie's hat-trick. The Sun, Maggie the Third. Today, on and on and on. Daily Express, Super Mag wins her hat-trick. The Daily Mirror, Thatcher back at number 10. London Daily News, third.
Everyone else moves on, but Tam Dalyell doesn't. He continues to give speeches about the Belgrano in Parliament and even convenes his own unofficial public inquiry into the sinking.
The Prime Minister knew something else that Sunday morning, and that was that the government of Peru had put forward peace proposals. Now, I will, for this, no, for this, not for the moment, for the sake of argument.
Dalyell never gave up on his belief that the sinking was a deliberate conspiracy to scupper the Peruvian peace plan. There is some circumstantial evidence for this, and the idea that Thatcher didn't know about the proposals is hard to believe. But I've never been convinced that the plan was viable, or as advanced as DL claimed. While making this series, we haven't found any fresh evidence to support his theory. But if there was no conspiracy, the question I keep coming back to is, why was there a cover-up? Why did the government decide to conceal the facts? It took the intervention of a jury to decide that Parliament had a right to know the truth about May the 2nd. But even after Ponting's trial, the government didn't agree to the tribunal that DL had always called for, and so an independent, factually accurate account of the sinking was never established. The politicians and civil servants we've spoken to insist now, as they did then, that the whole Belgrano scandal was a fuss over nothing. David Amand helped draft John Nott's original statement to Parliament and told us that the inaccuracies in it were there to protect British intelligence sources.
It was about how do you convey this essential truth? The hostile intent being shown by the Argentine fleet without giving away information which your naval advisors are saying you mustn't give away.
Richard Mottram, who commissioned the Crown Jewels, told us that the government's subsequent refusal to correct the record and turn John Nott's essential truth into an actual truth, though regrettable, did not constitute a deliberate attempt to mislead.
This wasn't particularly sinister. It was, again, civil servants doing what sometimes is useful and sometimes isn't. They were sort of reconciling all the bits of paper.
According to Michael Heseltine, the government revealed the facts as and when it could. There was no cover-up.
We were going to tell the truth. We did tell the truth. The issue went away.
The problem with all this is that there were so many opportunities to correct the record after the war, and yet the government chose not to. I can't escape the feeling that it was trying to hide something. To borrow a phrase, is there an essential truth in DL's argument? His belief that Thatcher was never serious about diplomacy and that she always wanted to escalate the war. Towards the end of our investigation, we found a notable interview John Nott gave to the Imperial War Museum.
We managed to reject all of the proposals for a negotiated settlement. The endless negotiations for a settlement, starting with the Hague shuttle, and then the Peruvian proposals. There was a succession of proposals to try and settle this thing. Margaret Thatcher was from the outset determined, although she pretended to go along with the diplomatic shuffle. But in fact, she was always determined that we had to recapture the Falkland Islands by force.
So, according to Thatcher's defence minister during the war, the diplomacy was all for show, a shuffle she pretended to go along with. Is this what the cover-up was really about? Did the controversy over the Belgrano touch a nerve because it threatened to expose the fact that Thatcher was always looking for an opportunity to start a shooting war? On our final trip to the archives, we found another piece of evidence from John Nott. A top-secret military plan he wrote and circulated for the first meeting of the War Cabinet 4 days after the Argentinian invasion. In a minute issued before the meeting, the following questions were raised.
When is it to our best advantage to embark on warlike activity? If we do it too early, and before we have been seen to exhaust all possible diplomatic initiatives, will we lose a great deal of international support? We would certainly be taken to the UN on the sinking of the first Argentinian warship.
So, what was John Nott's plan? At that first meeting of the War Cabinet, it was deemed too radical and the idea was dropped. But the plan sounds familiar. I'll let you decide.
Stage 1. A hunter-killer submarine would sink the first Argentinian warship which it came across. The cover story would be that this was in self-defense.
6th of March 1985. Trials, secrets, leaked documents. I wonder when all this will end. When I see our yachts, the rum shops, the roads with their potholes and the bananas hanging from the trees, it's hard to conceive what the other world is like. My God, 1984 has been and gone. Eric Blair would have been proud of himself.
After Ponting's trial, Ron Hardy and the Serious Crime Squad continue to investigate Narendra Sethia for several months, for both the diary and the case of the missing logbooks, but charges are never brought. We don't know why for certain. The archives shed some light. There is talk of the difficulties of extradition, but they don't give a definitive answer. Presumably, in the end, it's Ponting who saved Sethia from arrest. After one Section 2 case had backfired so dramatically, launching a second was surely out of the question.
8th of March 1985. No word from Hardy. What's happening? The two arms of the pincers seem to me plainly to be the strategists who chart the course of special branch action on the one side and the sycophantic barons of Fleet Street on the other side. Small wonder that the pulsating centre of British journalism has come to be known as the Street of Shame.
So Sethia isn't charged for the leaking of his diary. Instead, he goes on the offensive. Launching legal action against the Mail on Sunday, the Observer, the Sun, and the BBC for the reproduction of his diary without permission and for defamation. He's outraged at the way certain journalists and newspapers seem to work with the government to imply that he stole the logbooks.
They were defamatory, and I was in a state about this. Many people said to me, look, Seth, we totally understand why you want to do this, but taking somebody to court, and not just somebody, but a major national British newspaper, is not going to be easy. My bottom line response was, I don't care if I'm the small man in the street, but I'm going to do something.
The newspapers will fight dirty, Sethia is warned. Unless he withdraws his legal action, it's alleged that the Observer threatens to publish more stories about him, with dirt supplied by Richard Morley, the man who first accused Sethia of stealing the logbooks.
They intend to fight, trying to soften me up by starting a smear campaign. Morley, it seems, is more sinister than I thought. Whatever they choose to print, I am not backing out.
Sethia stands firm, but the newspapers are going to make things as expensive as they can. I have passed through the threat stage, Sethia writes to a friend in December 1985. Now they have progressed to the long, drawn-out stage of attempting to drag the case on. I'm preparing my old suits for sale to Oxfam.
Who would put up security? DL? Lots of words, but no help. I wonder what I'll do if this doesn't pull off. Put up my thumb and start hitching somewhere else.
As the trial date looms, Sethia borrows money from friends to cover his costs. He has no idea how he will pay his lawyers. If the legal action is unsuccessful, he will be bankrupt.
Sometimes I don't really worry about it, because I know I must win. But other times, I worry like mad. Fuck it, forget it. We'll see.
Eventually, in 1987, 2 years after Sethia first sought a retraction, the case against the Mail on Sunday is heard at the Royal Courts of Justice. The newspaper argues that its story about the logbooks can't have caused Sethia reputational damage. Even if he didn't steal them, he is exactly the kind of person who might have. His diary is a breach of the Official Secrets Act, after all, and he did admit to removing items from the submarine. Simon O'Keefe, who passed the diary to Tamdiel, testifies on Sethia's behalf. Defence lawyers ask Richard Morley to make himself available for every day of the trial. The Mail on Sunday even puts him up at the Waldorf, but he's never called to give evidence. Journalist Stuart Preble is in court and describes Sethia on the stand as looking like a man who had been through a horrible traffic accident. The proceedings last 3 weeks.
The jury was then asked to retire and consider their verdict. And there was an excellent pub just across the road. So whilst the jury was deliberating, we also went and deliberated, but in a slightly different way. And suddenly a chap came rushing over from the other side of the road saying, "They've got a decision, get back to court." And we only managed to get 1 pint down. And we rushed back to court, and you might imagine that, almost shaking with trepidation. The foreman of the jury was a lady, and Mr. Justice Borum said, "Have you reached a verdict? Do you find for the plaintiff or the defendant?" And the answer was, "We find for the plaintiff, Mr. Narendra Sethia." At which point I sort of collapsed.
The Mail on Sunday will have to pay damages, and the other newspapers have no choice but to settle. Sethia's payout is one of the largest in British libel history.
120,000 from the Mail on Sunday, 40 from the Observer, 15 from the Sun, 7.5 from the BBC. And that gave a total of about 182,500, which was a hell of a lot.
Sethia tells the press, "I'm delighted it's all over. I went through 4 years of pain, threats and anguish to clear my name. Friends said it would be a long bloody fight, and it has been."
There's some money, everything's all right now. But does the financial reward make it all right now? The answer is no. The money was welcome and great, but it never, ever heals the mental trauma that's been caused by it.
Sethia may have won his case, but in the years after the trial, his life starts to unravel. He quits his job at the yacht company, gets married and then quickly divorced. He burns through the money from the trial and sells his South Atlantic Medal of Service. When I first met him in St. Vincent, I noticed the psychological scars. Sethia has never forgiven himself for the part he played. In the years after the trial, he suffers from addiction and depression. He was eventually diagnosed with late-onset post-traumatic stress disorder. He showed us his correspondence with a PTSD doctor.
You should know the following. Whilst I am eloquent and so-called educated, and yes, was raised with a Buddhist and Indian background, A, I became an alcoholic. B, I became a crack cocaine addict. It was my only escape. C, I tried to commit suicide on 7 occasions, both slitting my wrists and taking overdoses of pharmaceutical medicines, as a result of which I was unconscious for 48 hours, and wrote down when I woke up that my greatest pain was waking up. I cry every moment I think of 1982. Excuse me. Every damn moment.
The costs of war are never truly accounted for. The numbers are disputed, but at least 500 British and Argentinian veterans of the conflict have killed themselves since the war ended. Sethia signs off his email with his favourite poem.
I've had this poem for years and years, decades, and it's by the author Khalil Gibran, Lebanese, amazing man. I wish I'd met him. I don't know where he got my name from, but it's called The Madman. You ask me how I became a madman. It happened thus. One day, long before many gods were born, I woke from a deep sleep and found all my masks were stolen. The 7 masks I have fashioned and worn in 7 lives. I ran maskless through the crowded streets, shouting, "Thieves, thieves, the cursed thieves." Men and women laughed at me, and some ran to their houses in fear of me. And when I reached the marketplace, a youth standing on a housetop cried, "He's a madman." I looked up to behold him. The sun kissed my own naked face for the first time, and my soul was inflamed with love for the sun, and I wanted masks no more. And as if in a trance I cried, "Blessed, blessed are the thieves who stole my masks." And thus I became a madman.
As Sethia struggles with his memories of 1982, something unexpected happens. In 2000, a historian researching the history of the Belgrano interviews Sethia and then puts him in touch with the Amigos, a charity created to keep the spirit of the ship alive and to remember those who were killed in the sinking. Within weeks, Sethia is in a bar in Buenos Aires, waiting for one of the Amigos to arrive.
I saw an elderly man with a moustache in a blue anorak. No formality about him. He certainly didn't look like a retired naval officer in his manner and his no tie, bushy eyebrows. And I stood up, almost trembling with nervousness. I held out my hand and said, "Sir, it is a great honor to meet you."
The man with the bushy eyebrows is the former captain of the Belgrano, Hector Bonzo.
With a little bit of a smile, Bonzo suddenly turned towards me and said to me in perfect English, "So I gather you were born in Scotland?" My wife and I were in Scotland once. We went up there for a holiday. It was lovely. And suddenly, we were smiling at each other. And it was such a beautiful thing to happen.
Over coffee and beer, the men try to reconcile their memories and experiences of 1982. Bonzo tells Sethia that in his view, the sinking was militarily justifiable, but politically criminal.
The meeting only lasted, I suppose, for about 2 hours. And before it ended, Bonzo turned to me and said that he wanted to give me something. And the first thing that he took out of his pocket was a medal that had been given to the survivors of the Belgrano. And so he gave me one. And at the same time then handed me a book titled the Los 1093 Tripulantes, 1093 crew, written by Captain Bonzo. And inside he'd handwritten a dedication to me, which translated basically read, "Narendra Sethia, by visiting Argentina, I recognize and acknowledge that there is something of a gentleman about you." Bonzo then got up and shook hands and left.
The one possession Sethia keeps safe with him in the years after his trial is his diary. For the first time since he gave it to O'Keefe, he decides to pass it on again.
This was a trauma for both sides. And so I went and found the original diary, which I've always had in my possession. And I removed the pages from page 51 onwards, which did not relate to the South Atlantic Patrol, sent them to the Asociación Amigos del Crucero General Belgrano.
This is the last journey the diary makes, from St. Vincent in the Caribbean to Buenos Aires.
It is with respect and honor that I herewith present my diary to the Asociación Sincerely, Narendra Sethia.
The amigos pass the diary between them, and it eventually catches the attention of a man called Santiago Belotho.
He contacted me in 2013, and I received a message in Spanish which translated said, "Hello, my name is Santiago Belotho, and I was a crew member on the cruiser General Belgrano during the war. I would very much like to be able to speak with somebody from the submarine. No hard feelings, candidly, about these events. Thank you so much, Santiago Belotho."
The two men start a correspondence, and they have been friends ever since. Santiago Belotho works for the Argentinian Naval Hydrographic Service. He paints in his spare time. 40 years ago, when he was just 19, he was a conscript during the war, a gunner on the 5th turret of the Belgrano. It was his account of the sinking that you heard in episode 2.
I read Seth's diary because of my fascination with what really happened to the ship. I read any publication I could get my hands on. It's an account of the utmost importance because it really shows us the other side of the tragedy. For me, reading the diary was deeply moving. I sympathized with Sethia, and the way he examined his feelings felt sincere. What I found most affecting was when he realized, right at the moment of the attack, that sailors on the other side were dying.
This is to do with two people who went through an experience, a disturbing experience for both of them. It's not actually something that you can define in words. So we give each other some peace. We happen to serve different governments and be on different vessels.
Everyone has their own feelings about it. And there are crewmates of mine who aren't keen on me being friends with Sethia. This is a false patriotism, because it's important to recognize the other side.
We don't communicate that often, and yet feel very close. And we both said to each other as recently as 2 months ago, hugs, one day we will meet. Lot of noise.
Sethia and Belotho have corresponded over the years using Facebook Messenger and Google Translate.
That's better.
We arranged a video call with a translator so they could speak face to face.
Es mejor.
¿Cómo estás, hermano?
Bien, gracias. ¿Y tú?
Muy bien, y ahora que te veo mucho mejor.
I have to speak. Es necesario hablar en inglés porque, como tú conoces, mi español no es bueno. It's like a dream to meet after 41 years. Words cannot say it.
Es una sensación impresionante para mí.
It's really an amazing feeling to see you for the first time. Honestly, it's something I could never have imagined. You have seemed so far away, but at the same time I have felt this deep connection.
Han pasado ya 41 años casi.
Nearly 41 years has gone by since the Malvinas War. How have you managed to deal with this situation over the years?
I think that very often I have buried it. You know, I wish I hadn't been there. I went through a period of years drinking a lot. Took drugs for a while. And all of those things, I don't do any of that now, but, you know, they were all the only way that I could escape.
Todo es similar, porque...
Yeah, it's similar. We've had our demons. The moment the war ended, we were abandoned by the state. We were stigmatized for many years. We were ashamed to say that we served on the Belgrano. I know things haven't been easy for you, but getting to know you has been healing for me, vitally important.
Towards the end of the call, they start to discuss Sethia's diary. It has inspired Bolotho to start writing up his own account of the war.
In 1982, just a few months after the war, I made a long recording. I didn't want to forget even the smallest detail of what happened during the patrol. I've used this recording in what I'm now writing. For me, it's incredibly important for a country to know its own history, its true history, not the distorted version put forward by the government of the day. What I'm attempting, and I'm hoping for your support, is for there to be two versions of that crucial moment. My account and yours, side by side. I hope it can be published.
One of the strange things is that the friend that I lent my diary to see if his fathers thought it could be published, in a very odd way, has done a goodness. He did the wrong thing, but all these years later, it has opened the passageway for communication. So in a funny way, I thank the arsehole who leaked my diary.
This is a time for forgiveness, a time for healing. There is a poem by Borges about Malvinas called Juan López and John Ward. It's about two soldiers from different sides who die on the islands. The poem talks about how they could have been friends. This is a crucial thing that will come out of our friendship. And if the book gets published, it will really be a form of closure.
Closure. Is there ever such a thing? We have followed the diary from an officer's mess table to the Caribbean, to Simon O'Keefe's house in South London, to the Houses of Parliament, the portals of the Old Bailey, Michael Heseltine's Northamptonshire estate, and Tamdiel's manor overlooking the Firth of Forth. And finally, it has led us to this conversation, this friendship between two men from opposite sides of the war.
Where to begin, dear Seth? It's a pleasure and an honor to count you both as a friend and brother. Our crossing paths has been a very important moment in my life.
Santiago, I echo your words. It has meant so much to me. My friend, thank you. Thank you.
On my last day in the Caribbean, I went with Sethia to a quiet spot in the beautiful island of Bequia. We had a beer in the bar and walked along the beach by the surf. It felt British in an old-fashioned way. The end of empire, indeed.
We're on the seafront at Bequia, Seth. Looking back, do you think now, with all that you know, that the attack was necessary?
I believe it could have been avoided. That was the greatest remorse of my life, which will remain with me forever, of having been an active party involved in the attack on the Belgrano.
And that remorse seems in some sense to have grown in force rather than diminished with time.
I would say probably yes. The grief of having taken part in something that took life is something that one can never discard, ever.
This is such a peaceful place. Contemplating it, I'm moved to ask you if you think we ever leave the past behind.
The only thing that exists is now, and that's just gone. So I cannot explain even to myself why, although I follow the philosophy of live for now, live for the present, it's all that counts, I don't understand why it is that I can still be triggered by yesterday.
That young man sitting at that table every day in 1982 during the conflict, writing that diary, could he ever have imagined that all these decades later it would be bearing testament to what happened?
The answer to that is very, very easy. No way. It's just how it worked out. So I can look at it in my Buddhist head and say, why am I regretful? Why do I have remorse? Is there any usefulness in that? What does it achieve? By then, when I come back down to earth, the hard realities of life are that it ain't always that easy to follow one's philosophy. And with that, the Buddha said, what the fuck now?
Lunch.
That's what he said. I knew I'd missed something. He said, who's getting the wets in? That's 2,517 years ago. I don't know what sort of beer it was, though.
The Belgrano Diary is a production from the documentary team at the London Review of Books. If you liked this episode, please leave a rating and a review wherever you listened. This helps other listeners find the show. If you click the link in the show notes, you can access hours of extended interviews. You can read a collection of the magazine's coverage of the Falklands War and the politics of the early 1980s on our website. There's a link to this in the show notes, where you will also find a list of the archival audio used in this episode. Special thanks to Michael Greenwell and the Scott Indie Podcast for kindly allowing us to use his episode with Clive Ponting. The series producer was Richard Curling. Ben Walker was the producer, and Zach Brophy, the story editor. Original music and sound design by by Joel Cox. The words of Santiago Belotho were read by Julio Galan. Additional voice work by Patrick Kennedy and Duncan Wilkins. I am Andrew Hagan.